שלום לכם. יש אנשים שיש להם עבודה מגניבה. פרופסור דיוויד קירבי היה חוקר של גנטיקה אבולוציונית, ואז הוא נטש את המעבדה כדי לחקור איך סרטים, תוכניות טלוויזיה ומשחקי מחשב משמשים ככלים של תקשורת המדע. לספרו הראשון קוראים חלוקי מעבדה בהוליווד, אז אתם יכולים להבין לבד במה הוא עוסק. וכדי שנוכל לשוחח, אני אעבור עכשיו לאנגלית. שלום and welcome to Professor David Kirby. Thank you for joining us.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
David, can popular culture such as films and TV shows change the way the public perceives scientific topics or scientists working in these disciplines?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, one of the things you have to remember is that, the ways in which people, encounter science is through popular culture, right? I mean, things like New Scientists, Discover Magazine, these are great, but most people are experiencing science, or at least seeing the world of science through popular culture in movies and television and computer games. And the other thing, when we think about what impacts people's attitudes towards science, right? Much scientific research or in science communication and in science popularization shows us that it's not knowledge that really shapes people's attitudes and beliefs, right? It's what we refer to as the cultural meanings of science. Right? So it's what science means to people that shapes how it is that they think about science and their attitudes towards science. And popular culture, and we'll talk about that later, whether it's for good or bad, has a very significant influence on what science means to people because it can contextualize science, right? It can contextualize it and show its sort of social, political, economic implications.
So when you talk about contextualizing, you mean like basically is science a good thing or a bad thing even?
Yeah, or both. I mean, it contextualizes it within a story, and the story can create meaning, and that's how it can influence people. So sometimes it can show us, the sort of uses of science, how it can be used for good, but also it can show us what can be some of the misuses of science as well.
So what about the other direction? Can popular culture impact science and, for example, how science is done or funded?
Oh yeah, certainly. So, because popular culture impacts the public and the public has a say in, how science is funded, um, movies and TV shows can definitely have an impact on science. So, one thing is that they can raise awareness of a particular issue, right? And they can convince the public that an issue requires more scientific or, economic attention paid to it. This is something I refer to as the War Games effect, right? After the 1983 film with Matthew Broderick. And the idea is that, movies and TV shows can call attention to a particular topic, like we saw with the movie Contagion and, emerging viruses, or movies like Deep Impact and Armageddon, the threat of what we call near Earth objects, right? So I like to think of these as being akin to the Ghost of Christmas in Charles Dickens' novel, A Christmas Carol, right? So movies and television, right, they can present us with a sort of bleak vision of the future, right? Some sort of scientific mishap that could lead to, the end of the world. But they also, like the Ghost of Christmas Future, tell us that we've got time to stop it as long as we pay attention to whatever the issue might be. And it's also the case that movies and TV and video games, they can stimulate technological development, right? So there are technologies that appear in these pieces of popular culture that, make people want to see these things become reality, right? So they are essentially what I refer to as pre-product placements, right? So we all know what a product placement is. It's something that's put into a movie or a TV show that instills a desire in the audience to obtain the product. But with these pre-product placements, the only way to obtain those products is to support their development, right?
I'm
But it's
thinking
also the
about
idea that
Back
because,
to the
yeah,
Future. What you just said reminds me of Back to the Future and those beautiful skateboards that they were
yeah,
using.
yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, the floating skateboards,
Hmm.
the inflatable gym shoes that he had, all those sorts of things. People watch those and say, "Yeah, I want that." And for many of the pieces of pop culture, they've consulted with engineers and scientists and technologists, about the items in there, and so there's a way to actually support these things. I mean, one of my favorite examples is from Big Hero 6, right?
Uh-huh.
The inflatable robot, right? That was, it's an inflatable medical robot. And that was something that scientists helped them to create,
Hmm.
Baymax, because they wanted to show people that there's a lot of benefits to having soft medical robots. And so their research got a major bump, by being in that movie. So yeah, technological development can be another way, or just the idea of shaping a scientific institution's identity, right? And the best example of that is NASA, right? I mean, NASA worked on dozens of films and TV shows and video games, and the goal is to help shape their image as a scientific organization that not only sort of does basic research and travels into space, but can actually solve problems here on Earth. Right. So that type of institutional identity is only one you can get, through lots of narratives supporting and, reinforcing the idea that that's what your institution is about.
Ah, I see. Well, I get how popular culture may shape our perception of science and scientists through its narratives, through the heroes and the villains. But I'm thinking about movies like Jurassic Park or TV show like Big Bang Theory. These are really not textbook, and people don't intend on learning science when watching them. So why should we care about the accuracy of science in movies and TV shows?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things that you need to keep in mind is that, right, when we talk about science, right, we're talking about science as more than just factual knowledge in a textbook, right? Science incorporates everything that I refer to as the sort of systems of science, right? So it's the scientists, but it's also the lab spaces, it's also the interactions with other organizations like the government or law enforcement or just general science and society, right? So the ways in which science as an overall process and science as an institution are depicted can have those impacts as well, rather than just learning, scientific facts, through TV shows.
Mhm.
And in terms of accuracy, I often think of accuracy, it can be a sort of straw person, right? Because that's the thing that many people focus on, and yet, when we talk about the impacts that popular culture can have, it often doesn't matter whether the science is real or not. Now, certainly there are cases where, especially with things that are medically related, that are health related, right? You definitely want scientific accuracy in that case because you don't want to shape people's opinions on something that may harm them if they don't understand it correctly. But with Jurassic Park, for example, you know, the major impact that that film had um, was on our perceptions of genetic engineering,
Mm.
right? That genetic engineering is something bad because it leads to dinosaur monsters that go around and eat people. So whether the dinosaurs in that were accurate or not had no real influence on people's attitudes towards genetic engineering. So in that case, yeah, accuracy was good. They brought in a lot of scientists to help them with the dinosaurs, but it really wasn't going to hurt anyone that the Dilophosaurus was not as accurate as it was in real life.
I see your point. Well, another thing scientists are very critical of sometimes is science fiction, such as X Files or even Star Trek. Well, some scientists are really bitter and say, well, it doesn't make sense, and why do they have explosions in space and that kind of stuff. Many others actually quote science fiction as what sparked their interest in science in the first place. So, how do you reconcile these really opposing sentiments?
Yeah. I mean, one thing is, for scientists who, complain about science fiction, I mean, they have a point when we're looking at science fiction, from an earlier age, right? So much of the science fiction before, 1993, as I see Jurassic Park as a sort of watershed event, uh, was problematic, right? You had a lot of mad scientists running around, whose experiments, involve turning gorillas into humans, right? There's no real point to what it is that they're doing other than it's crazy science. So older science, if that's your, you know, if that's the point that you're looking at, certainly can be problematic. And so when most scientists complain about it, even things like the X-Files, that's something from the 1990s, Star Trek started in the 1960s. There's certainly scientific depictions that are problematic. But over the last 25 years, there's been a very significant change in depictions of science and scientists in movies and television shows and computer games. And you're more likely today to see scientists depicted as heroes than you are to see them depicted as mad scientists.
Mhm.
And some of that is, we've, got more access to science. And some of it is that more scientists are involved as consultants for movies and television shows. And it's really hard to ask a scientist to help you with your movie and then, have a character that's, not conforming to what they would like to see as a scientific depiction. So yes, if you look at older popular culture, lots of bad science, lots of negative depictions, but more recent popular culture is actually something that, maybe depicts scientists still unrealistically, but in the other way, in a positive way.
Yeah, like finding a cure within 24 hours type of heroes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also the case, in my work, I'm interested in what the scientists can bring to a consulting experience, but it's also the case that we, have to pay attention to what constraints, these cultural producers are under as well. I talk about the idea of, well, scientists bring scientific expertise, but these people making movies and TV shows, they're bringing entertainment expertise, right? They know what makes for an entertaining visual story.
So let me switch to your new research that looks at how movies serve as a battleground over science's role in influencing morality. And when I read that, I was asking, does science have such a role in culture?
Well, it does, whether scientists wanted to or not, right?
Hmm.
People um, can take their cues about their moral stances from what they've seen in the natural world or from what scientists have talked about. I mean, that's why when we think about something like evolution,
Hmm.
there's still a major controversy about teaching evolution here in the United States,
Hmm.
right? Because the belief is that if you believe in something like evolution, that we've only descended from other animals, then we are nothing but animals, and that's going to affect the ways in which we,
Mm.
you know, treat each other from a moral perspective. So in this new project, I'm interested in the stories that we tell about science,
Hmm.
right? So like I talked about earlier, popular culture influencing these cultural meanings of science. And it can do that through the stories it's telling about science. And that's why my first book was about scientists becoming involved as consultants, right? Because they wanted to influence how these stories about science were told. So with the new book, I'm looking at the ways in which religious groups have influenced depictions of science in movies.
Huh.
In particular, I'm looking at movie censorship. So in America from 1930 to 1968, there was an organization called the Hays Office that was sort of an official censorship group in Hollywood. So they looked at every script and every movie and had to give their sort of seal of approval on this. And in order to get the seal of approval, especially in the earlier days from, the mid 1930s through the mid 1950s, to get that, you had to have a story that they liked. And most people know, the Hays Office through, their sort of censoring of things like violence and sex and language. Um, but they censored everything. And so I was interested in how they censored science, right? What stories did they want to control? And certainly one of the things they wanted to control was how evolution was presented in movies. And the Hays Office from 1935 till about 1950 just said, nope, no evolution. We don't want it. So they'd remove any mentions of Darwin, or if a mad scientist wanted to prove evolution, they'd make him change his reasons to something else. But they also looked at other things like psychiatry, uh, for example, especially because the Hayes office was very influenced by Catholic theology. They didn't like anything that removed personal responsibility for a sin, and psychiatry seemed to be doing that, right?
Mm.
So it's not you committing that sin; it's some sort of neurological disorder. But also, there are ways in which science tipped over into sexuality, or science tipped over into violence. Um, they didn't like any scenes set in operating theaters, right? Because that's gruesome. That's too gruesome for audiences to
Mm.
actually, take in without being fainting in the aisles. So the censors were trying to control what these stories were about science, because they wanted to control what science meant to the public.
So in a way, it's really interesting because we started this conversation with the idea that uh, popular culture can shape our perception of science, and you mentioned a censorship office that wanted to take over this presentation and perception of science. This is really eye-opening. So
Yeah.
thank you very much, Professor David Kirby, for this conversation.
Oh yeah, it was my pleasure.